What happens when you put a soaking wet toilet roll in a worm bin? You put food scraps down the center of the toilet tube, and then you dump even more food scraps all over the top of the toilet roll. You top it with some glacial rock dust and eggshell grit and surround it with torn paper. Finally, you put the cutest feeding zone indicator on top of the toilet roll and wait 11 days. Well, stay tuned and I'll show you what happened.
Okay, here we are 11 days later with Cinderella. I'll take off the very loose bubble wrap. I see the paper towel. The grocery bag is still showing some dampness on the top, which is good. This topmost material seems a little bit dry. There's Landon's haircut still hanging in there. But remember, this area, the toilet roll itself was not saturated, but very damp and still very heavy. Oh, and the worms obviously have gone down. I've turned the toilet roll over. Look at the worms on the bottom there. Now, they're not just in the center feeding tube. Those worms are finding their way through the layers of the toilet paper itself. This has been my experience previously when I fed a toilet roll to Teeny, and they can somehow worm their way into all of these layers, and that's how they basically digest the toilet roll over time. Is they don't just concentrate on the feeding tube, they go everywhere. I'm finding worms down the center by the looks of it, as well as here on the outside of the toilet roll, which is showing a discoloration. It was white toilet paper, so it is soaking up the juices from the bin. But looks like it's not just from the inner feeding area, it's all over. And then there's the worm party going on in the center. Now that shiny food is what's left over is the onion skins that were part of the food that I pushed down that feeding tube. Not to neglect Prince Charming here and his role as the cutest feeding zone indicator ever. I'm going to put him safely aside until I feed up this bin once more. I can see a lot of worms still on the bottom here. I also just want to take a moment I apologize for the jiggling of Cinderella. We are in the throes of moving houses. So Cinderella is perched onto a stool with a cushion. So it's a little bit jiggly. My apologies. But you can see the worm party just continues. Every handful that I turn over just has worms still actively engaged in this feeding zone. I fed on top of the toilet roll after putting down a layer of torn up brown paper bag. Obviously, there's still some corn husks remaining, but you know, the worms, the moisture obviously permeated all those layers down to the bottom, and the worms followed the food, followed the moisture, and then every handful just brings more and more. Those paper bags that I tore up, they are clumping a little bit. Worms don't seem to mind. They are into them. Cinderella has some pretty intense moisture going on down the bottom. Obviously no standing moisture, which is great, but plenty of moisture, which will also draw the worms over here. Oops, I flung a little bit of vermicompost up here. I just want to make sure that little ledge doesn't have any worms stuck in it. So I doubt they would find their way back down into the bin. All right, what I have to do here is I have to clean off the bottom. The toilet roll sits up quite high, and I want it to be buried, of course, after I feed on top of it again, which means I do have to go right to the bottom here so that the toilet roll is going to sit squarely on the bottom as deep as possible. I think I'm going to blame the toilet roll for having such a high moisture level in Cinderella. I didn't put dry carbon in. Totally, the torn up paper was dry, but the toilet roll being semi-saturated, I think, is responsible for why this bin is borderline getting too much moisture, but it's Cinderella and it's all good fun, and the worms don't seem to mind. I didn't cram the food down that feeding tube, so I know I wouldn't have created an anaerobic condition. And, the fact that the worms are all the way through it, it further demonstrates that I didn't go too far with the moisture or the density of the feeding. I'm going to try to clean it out here as best I can and feed again right in this tube because, I think that's a way to get this toilet roll underway. First, I have to get all these little wisps and everything off my fingers so I can get some more food. On the menu today is just my typical food scraps, a lot of avocado peels, banana peels, tea leaves, some carrot peels. They've all been pulsed in my food processor, and in the last few pulses, I add some powdered eggshells that I've powdered in a coffee grinder. So the food isn't that moist. Banana peels don't add a lot of moisture. And obviously neither do the avocado pits. The only thing that would have really any moisture here are the carrot peels. I'm smearing it all over this toilet roll to see what kind of a party we can get next time. But I actually didn't pack too much down the center. I did get a sense of Cinderella's population is quite high, so I'm giving another healthy handful around the edges for the worms that don't make it to the toilet roll. Because this is Cinderella, she's had atypical bedding. There's Landon's haircut. I can tell by the very white hair. Also lots of leaf stems and even needles from our tree brought in with the leaves, the rose stems from the bouquets. But I'm going to give her some more leaves that obviously have some of those chunkier elements still in them. Remember, the toilet roll itself is also carbon. So even though I gave a hefty feeding, there's plenty of carbon in this bin. I probably should have buried some of these chunkier paper clumps and the toilet roll holders that I fed previously, because now they're going to sit on the top of the bin and maybe dry out. That's a bit of an oops. Cinderella also has the lace from a cotton t-shirt that I put in here. And she's eaten pretty much everything except this lace. I'm just going to leave it in here and let it follow its course. Finally, I've got Prince Charming ready to be my feeding zone indicator one more time. I really found as I got more worm bins that I would forget where I fed, and having this feeding zone indicator, thanks to my sister, has been a great help. He's far more different than just an overturned piece of paper towel or something to remind me. Plus, he's just so darn cute. A final wisp check before I replace Cinderella's brown paper bag. This actually is just half of a brown paper bag, so worms can't get tied up inside the layers. And then just Cinderella's very loose bubble wrap covering. Hopefully some of that moisture will disappear by next time. Thanks so much for watching. Bye for now.